Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into a fascinating and, frankly, pretty explosive period in American history. We're looking at the westward expansion between, 1877 and 1898, and we want to go beyond just the sort of romantic myths, dig into the huge economic forces at play.
Absolutely, because it wasn't just pioneers heading west. It was driven by big engines. Our goal here is to unpack the main causes. We're talking technology, government action, the hunt for resources. And then there's this really interesting paradox.
Right, the paradox, how all this expansion, this supposed success, actually ended up causing real hardship for many of the people involved, especially farmers. So we'll look at those contradictory facts, the new towns, but also the resistance movements that sprang up.
Exactly. The sources really paint a picture of, less organic settlement and more of an industrialized push. You see this massive shift from the open range cowboy era to highly mechanized farming. And federal policy, plus that lure of gold and silver, they were the catalysts. It's not just how it happened, but who benefited, and crucially, why these farmer protest movements became so vital.
Okay, let's start with that engine of change, technology. The sources point to this huge shift in farming. Production just skyrocketed, didn't it?
Oh, completely. Between about 1870 and 1900, you saw corn and wheat production basically doubled.
Wow, how is that even possible? Not just with people and horses, surely.
No way. This is where industrial power comes in. You're talking steam tractors, mechanical reapers, combine harvesters, big machinery. It meant fewer people could farm vastly more land. Agriculture became, industrialized.
And alongside the big machines, there was something much simpler, but maybe just as disruptive. Barbed wire.
Joseph Clinton, 1874. Yes. Seems basic, but it was revolutionary. Cheap fencing. Suddenly, settlers could fence off their land, protect crops, keep cattle contained.
Which sounds practical, but it must have caused conflict.
Huge conflict, the fence wars, because it completely undermined the open-range cattle industry. Ranchers needed vast open spaces.
Yep.
Barbed wire chopped it all up. It basically killed the open-range model and forced everything towards private fenced-in land. The West physically changed.
So tech is shaking things up on the ground. But what about the government? You said they were a catalyst.
A massive catalyst.
Yeah.
Washington wanted the West populated and fast. They threw huge support behind it. Think about the railroads. The Pacific Railroads Acts.
Right, the land grants.
Unbelievable amounts of land. Millions of acres given directly to railroad companies. And the clever part, or maybe the controversial part, was the company sold that land
To settlers.
to fund building the actual railroad. So the government subsidized the companies, who then profited from selling land to the very people the railroad was meant to serve.
It built the infrastructure, though. That famous golden spike moment in '69, linking everything up.
Exactly. Promontory Summit, Utah. Suddenly, the West Coast wasn't isolated anymore. It was tied directly to the East. And don't forget other government actions. The Homestead Act back in '62, 160 acres of free land. A huge draw.
A massive incentive.
And, crucially, support for the telegraph. Think about it. You find gold or harvest wheat, and instantly, through the telegraph, you know the price in New York or London. That made large-scale commercial farming viable out west. You weren't operating in a vacuum.
Okay, so the tracks are laid, communications there. What about the people rushing in? Farming was one draw, but there was something faster, right? The lure of riches.
Oh, yeah. The gold and silver rushes didn't stop in '49. They kept going for decades. Take Pikes Peak, 1869. Gold is found. Boom. Sources say over 100,000 people flooded into that area. Just like that.
100,000, that's staggering.
And it was only possible because the railroads could get them there, and the telegraph spread the word like wildfire.
Which leads us to these boom towns, places like Deadwood, Denver. They just appeared.
Seemingly overnight, yeah. Wherever minerals were struck. Pure chaos, mostly. Just instant economies built around digging stuff out of the ground. And incredibly diverse places because the dream of getting rich quick appealed to, everyone. Miners, shopkeepers, gamblers,
It
laborers.
was a real melting pot, but maybe a volatile one.
Very volatile, often built on the hope of a single mine. If the mine dried up, the town could disappear almost as fast as it appeared. But interestingly, many of these rough-and-tumble places eventually became the stable centers, the state capitals, the regional hubs we know today. They laid the groundwork.
Okay, so we have this picture of rapid development, industrial farming, resource rushes, but you mentioned a paradox. This success, especially in farming, somehow led to financial trouble. How does that work?
It's the classic trap of overproduction, really. Because of mechanization, everyone was producing so much more grain, way more than before. The global market got flooded, supply shot way past demand.
So prices dropped.
Exactly. They plummeted through the 1880s and 90s. So a farmer might grow twice as much wheat, but the total money they got for it could actually be less than the year before. It was crushing.
And the small farmers felt that most.
Absolutely. They couldn't afford the big steam tractors, combine harvesters. They simply couldn't compete on volume or efficiency, so they couldn't make ends meet. Defaulted on loans, massive numbers of foreclosures, and who bought the land?
The bigger industrial farms.
Right. Land ownership got more and more concentrated.
So who was making money in this system? It sounds like the farmers were squeezed.
Squeezed from all sides. On one hand, they had to buy supplies, tools, fertilizer, manufactured goods. The prices for those were kept high by industrial trusts. Monopolies, basically.
Selling low, buying high.
Precisely. And then there was the cost of getting their crops to market. The railroads.
Ah, the railroads again, the same ones built with government help.
The very same. And because they often had a local monopoly, maybe only one line served a particular farming area, they could charge incredibly high rates for shipping. One source calls it unnaturally high prices. They practiced price discrimination. Cheap rates for long distances where there was competition, but sky-high rates for the short haul where a farmer had no other choice.
That sounds incredibly frustrating. Isolated farmers facing monopolies, how did they even begin to fight back?
Well, desperation breeds organization. The first big one was the Grange, the Patrons of Husbandry, started in 1867. Initially, it was more social, educational, trying to combat rural loneliness.
Right.
But the economic pain quickly turned to political. They started pushing hard for state laws, the Granger laws, to regulate railroad rates and the fees charged by grain elevators, which were often also monopolies.
So they started flexing some political muscle. Was there more?
Oh, yes. Building on that came the Farmers Alliance. This was bigger, more coordinated across the South and West. And they went beyond just lobbying. They set up their own cooperative businesses, co-op stores, co-op grain elevators, even insurance programs, trying to bypass the monopolies altogether.
Direct action.
Definitely. And this movement, the Farmers Alliance, became the absolute core of the Populist Party, a major third-party force in the 1890s.
Now, was everyone included in these alliances? What about African-American farmers?
That's a crucial point. They faced all the same economic pressures, plus intense racism. So, in the 1880s, the Colored Farmers Alliance formed. It gave black farmers a specific platform to organize, bargain collectively, and fight back.
What were their key issues, according to the sources?
Well, besides the railroad rates and trusts, they tackled the cropland system head-on.
Explain that, cropland.
It was brutal. Basically, a farmer, often a sharecropper or a small landowner with little cash, had to mortgage their next year's crop just to get seeds, tools, or credit to survive the current year.
Wow, a built-in debt cycle.
Exactly. An endless cycle, almost impossible to escape, especially for black farmers in the South. The alliance fought for collective bargaining power against landlords and merchants who ran these credit systems.
Okay, shifting focus a bit to the lasting physical impact. How did the railroads change the map permanently? You mentioned boom towns becoming stable centers.
The railroad was often the deciding factor. A town with the rail connection could become a real hub. Look at Sacramento out west. The Central Pacific Link made it a vital commercial center. Or think of Dodge City, Kansas.
The queen of the cow towns.
Right. Why? Because it was where the cattle trails ended and the railroad began. Huge herds were driven there, loaded onto trains, and shipped east for processing. The railroad made it the spot.
But this progress, this development, it wasn't without victims. There was displacement, right?
Huge displacement. The sources are really clear on this. Mining rushes, like in the Black Hills after gold was found there, directly led to the government breaking treaties and forcing Native American tribes off their ancestral lands. Land promised to them was just taken from mining.
And the environment, too. Barbed wire, you mentioned.
Barbed wire changed the ecology by ending the open range. And that, combined with hunting and railroad expansion, decimated the buffalo herds, which was catastrophic for Plains Indian cultures that relied on them. The whole ecosystem was disrupted.
Looking at the new towns that did stick, we see diverse communities forming, often under difficult circumstances. Tell us about the immigrant communities. Chinatowns.
Yeah, places like Seattle's Chinatown, built by immigrants who'd often first come to work on the railroads or in mines or canneries. And what's remarkable is their resilience. These neighborhoods thrived despite widespread hostility and discriminatory laws.
Like the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882.
Exactly. That act basically slammed the door on new Chinese immigration and made life very difficult for those already here. They were pushed out of many jobs, like mining, so they created their own niches. The sources mention laundry houses becoming a common business.
A stereotype, almost, but born out of necessity.
Right. It was one of the few economic avenues left open. It shows both their adaptability and the intense discrimination they faced.
And what about African American settlements? You mentioned the Colored Farmers Alliance fighting exploitation, but were there also efforts to build separate communities?
Absolutely. The Exodester movement is key here. After Reconstruction failed in the South, thousands of African Americans migrated west, seeking land and freedom from Jim Crow. They founded numerous towns. Nicodemus, Kansas, founded in 1877, is probably the most famous example.
What did Nicodemus represent?
It symbolized black self-determination, the pursuit of land ownership, and an attempt to build independent communities away from the intense oppression of the South. A really powerful statement.
Okay, let's try to wrap this up. Looking back at this period, 1877 to 1898, it feels like a story of massive, almost contradictory forces. You have this incredible engine of technology and government policy driving expansion and economic growth.
But the benefits flowed incredibly unevenly.
Right, leading to
Okay.
widespread hardship, especially for farmers, which then fueled these powerful grassroots movements demanding change, questioning who this progress was actually for.
That tension really is the core takeaway. You see the farmer alliances, the populace, directly confronting corporate power, the railroads, the trust power that was often enabled by the government's own subsidies and land grants. It's this clash between concentrated corporate wealth and organized popular resistance that really sets the stage for the populist uprising and shapes so many American political debates that followed. Debates about regulation, fairness, the role of government. It echoes today.
And that leads to a final thought for you, our listener. The sources make it clear that those huge government land grants to railroads created enormous private fortunes. But they also point to political corruption, as these corporations obviously wanted to protect their interests. So, thinking about that tension, government subsidies creating private power, which then arguably undermines the public good, how did that early dynamic influence America's ongoing argument? The argument over corporate power versus the rights and needs of the individual producer, the small farmer, the worker. Something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.